Let's move on to what obviously got plenty of attention because this was a lot of the movies that came out last year, comic book movies. So for you personally, what would you say, counting DC and Marvel, is your favorite?
The Suicide Squad.
So we can actually talk about that slightly with Zack Snyder's Justice League. I think what these movies were they were probably the most important films in this DC series because what they both did was helped remedy, I would say in my opinion, but I think most people can agree that the two worst films in this series are Suicide Squad and the theatrical cut of Justice League.
I don't think that's in any debate.
Like some people still like the theatrical cut of Suicide Squad, and that's perfectly fine. But broadly, a lot of people would point to those two films as being the worst. And these two, what they both did was I felt that they kind of took what was there, expanded upon them, and made them good. The Suicide Squad, not only a big improvement over that initial film, but also I feel was actually not really made out of hatred towards it, but more out of, okay, there was good here, but let's try and do this again, but let's let's try and do it right.
It didn't hide from the last film. And Harley Quinn and Captain Boomerang clearly worked together before. They're mates. They've just gone on missions since. Rick Flag and Harley Quinn again clearly worked together before, and it built on that. It made them feel like an actual, almost like adopted family, and that worked so hard because I'll admit I didn't feel Captain Boomerang just because it was so early in the film, but I felt Rick Flag go. I think part of that was just the moment anyway. Was set up really well, worked really well, and suddenly I was there like, I feel this. I really feel this.
In the first film, his character wasn't done hugely well, but in this one, they take his character. You could deem it to be actually kind of a natural progression of how he is, and then he actually ends up in this one being perhaps one of the most likable and the most moral people in the film. And then, when it gets to the moment where he gets killed, it is kind of a gut punch.
Do you know what? One of the things that I think really hits hard as well. Peacemaker didn't want to fucking do it either.
Like on the surface, it does seem like edgy R-rated like action film,
which it is.
But what I think is great about this movie, and let's just talk about this, like James Gunn is absolutely the heart and soul of this film. He's definitely he wrote and directed the film, so it's absolutely his vision, which makes it better than the last one because a vision is clearly present and is not really heavily compromised. Kind of like his strength with a lot of his previous films is that it might seem juvenile and violent on the surface, but under it, when you look at it, there is actually quite a bit of depth, not only to the people, but even to the story itself. Much like his Guardians films, its strong point is the characters, but also it's the journey that they go on and how even through this mission, it kind of brings out things in them. It handles the humanization of these like seemingly violent, tough people very well. Ultimately, I think it culminates in some like very like moving, quite powerful sequences towards the end, I would say, which I think was a big surprise for me.
Each character gets their moment. I don't feel like any of the characters are disposable. Like last film, Deadshot and Harley, that was it, really, that you needed. Rick Flag, okay, fine, because of the connection with the Enchantress. But really, outside of that, I didn't give a shit. When El Diablo went up and sacrificed himself, I was like, all right, cool. I guess that's fine. You get so many character beats at different points, and you get them developing both alone and together, which I found really, really great. And you didn't need a million flashbacks to get to it either.
Again, another improvement on this one, although there's a bit of time jumping, it didn't take like so long to get going like the first one did. And in fact, this one starts out quite fast, obviously, because it's part of that like kind of fake out. It's way more efficient with its like runtime, even though it's like longer, but it's more efficient and it feels a lot simpler than that first film did. It's a comic book movie that does know how to like push the medium quite a lot, not only heavily with like violence, but also in terms of just knowing how to bring the comic book elements to life, but also combined it with this like man on a mission kind of military story and also kind of anti-government story as well. And it's one where even when at the end, when it gets a bit more effects heavy and blockbustery, it kind of feels just naturally earned. And it ends up, culminating in a really satisfying finish. It's got really good editing as well. I think a very well used cast. Idris Elba is given a lot to do, and he really relishes playing this character. John Cena gives by far his best performance today. He really excels as Peacemaker.
I can't wait for Peacemaker to come out over here, the series, because I was fascinated about the performance. I wanted to see more of it because it leans into the comedic strengths that he had, but gives it this edge of pathos, which really, really works. I think I think one of the things I love about the film is that it is effectively trauma bonding the movie. The whole thing is a message about freeing yourself from control, because ultimately,
Mhm.
you know what, I think this is actually a really, really American film. I think that spiritually, it is all about these characters growing, overthrowing the controls that are binding them, and becoming free. That's what the
Mhm.
film is, and it's almost
Yeah.
like freedom through partnership and companionship and almost love. You see them breaking through their bonds, like Harley when she realizes that she's about to join into a manipulative relationship. It's a bit like the Joker's game, just fucking kills him.
That might be the best scene that Harley Quinn has been in these films so far.
It was a great scene because you got, you know, her personality didn't change, but she was just so aware for the first time and using that and not disregarding what she was, but getting through it and being who she is now, which I
Yeah.
found really, really fascinating. King Arc is just great, both effects wise and part of the message of acceptance.
I agree, like accepting this like this big dumb animal and actually like teaching it compassion and not to just like eat people all the time. There's even a bit of a man versus nature theme that you can sort of, well, man versus animal theme that you can read into,
Yeah.
especially with the rat stuff.
Is actually the perfect villain for the film. Because it both represents the man's manipulation of the animal, but it also represents the danger and the terror of control and the need to get rid of that. And
Mhm.
in one swoop, and I think that was really smart to use Starro. Because on paper, you're like, what the fuck, Starro, really? A lot of people think that might not work for a film. Now, I love Starro, so I did not
Mhm.
care. It's so thematically relevant. The action was pretty stellar as well. It was quite
Yeah.
bombastic, over the top, but then got relatively grounded at points, and each character had their own sequence that felt, you know, something that, like the character would do. So, for example, Peacemaker and Bloodsport, they got their most grounded ones. Ratcatcher got the almost like the sneaky little action scene. Harley
Mhm.
Quinn got the one that was most visually impressive.
Ratcatcher did have the big moment at the end, but that was kind of earned at that
Yeah,
point.
it's like a sneak. It
Yeah.
was like a sneaky, underhanded move. Was more my point. It didn't feel too funny, but it didn't feel like it was completely self-serious and unable to take a moment and acknowledge the absurdity of the situation, which was great. It wasn't like a Marvel film in tone, which a lot of people were worried about at all. It was a lot, you know, it was a much darker beast. It was a unique thing, but it also wasn't afraid to have a bit of levity, which I think made a lot of the emotional moments work really, really well, because those moments also helped you really care. And then when the
Mhm.
characters went down, you were like, oh shit. So I
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
James Gunn does another one.
I wouldn't be opposed to that at all. And I think I did go into it with my worry being that like they would maybe take the wrong lessons and just instead make it just a Marvel film with an R rating and that's it. But this film I think is a bit more in line with Gunn's like earlier films like Slither or Super, a
Yeah.
bit aesthetically gritty because it is quite a gritty looking film, but also because it does have that more like unhinged, you know, violent aspect to it that like he had to kind of downplay in the Guardians films. And I think also this film helped transition into the other one as well. This film is also what if the Justice League situation went right in terms of an MCU director joining this DC film series? Because I think the problem is, regardless of whether it was from the ground up, regardless, even if Joss Whedon were the nicest man on earth, his tone just does not quite fit this universe. So inherently, I don't think he was ever a great choice. But James Gunn's tone, it's no wonder that he wrote a Zack Snyder film. He wrote like Dawn of the Dead because his style was much more befitting for both Snyder's vision and also even the visions of the other directors that have come on to
I
make these
think
films.
I think James Gunn has a much more mutable style because his themes are a bit more universal than a lot of,
Mhm.
like, for example, Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon have very contrasting themes,
I know.
while James Gunn's is pretty much family. Most of his
I know.
films,
Yeah.
it's between ruffians, and that you can put in fucking anything. So,
Yeah.
like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
James Gunn is one of those directors that can just make a movie. I'm talking about Zack Snyder's Justice League, because that's where we're
Mhm.
starting to drift now. I liked it. It was definitely better than the Joss Whedon cut. Absolutely. There's a lot about it that worked. It was a very, very much a Zack Snyder film. It was a bit brighter than his normal films, which actually I think really helped it.
Yeah.
It was too bloody long. I mean, I loved it.
Rather just have seen a version that was more just cut for theaters.
Or arguing for something like one of his Watchmen cuts. I mean, I'm not sure how familiar you are with different cuts of Watchmen.
I know that there's extended, and I know that there's one with the Tales of the Black Frighter added. Is that what it felt like to you? Like the cut
Yeah,
and that had the Tales
yeah,
of the
it
Black
felt
Frighter?
like that. Don't get me wrong. A good 3.5 hours of this film were needed, but there was four. I think the nightmare sequence. It wasn't one of the best things about Batman v Superman. It wasn't needed. I liked Martian Manhunter at the end. I thought that was actually all right. I get why the nightmare sequence was in it, but I think you could have just had it with Bruce being restless and unsure, and you could have done it in different ways and it would have been better.
Well, because it is like a 4-minute scene, I totally get what you mean. Maybe a scene that Zack could have just like shared on his own, that wouldn't have actually been part of the film. He could have just said, "Oh, here's a scene that I shot as well," like, and not actually incorporated it into the movie. Like, if we're just talking individually, well, that scene was okay as a vision, but
as an individual scene, it worked.
Agree with that mindset that the film could probably be cut down to be a bit more of a manageable 3 hours in length, or it would still be 3.5 hours, I think. This was absolutely Zack taking the opportunity to just put in everything that he wanted to put in. I was really impressed by it. I found it quite an emotional and epic experience. Felt that it tied together his vision from the first two films.
Yeah.
Even though it might not be his complete vision, because obviously he had 2 more movies planned, it's probably the best place to leave it because it kind of ties things together quite well. I loved what they did with not only the new characters, well, kind of new characters, but like stuff like the Flash and Cyborg and how they handled these like individual movie characters.
So much better in this one.
Yeah, and even on its own, I thought was quite well done, and even stuff with like Batman and Superman as well. Was about his version of this film is that although technically darker, it felt a lot more genuinely heartfelt and a lot nicer than the 2017 version, because the 2017 version, beyond just being really inept as a film, also just has this just kind of stain of not only like Whedon's dickishness kind of, it rubs off on that film, but it also feels almost like an extreme example of, we got to pander to people that didn't like the other two films, and also just straight up do like piss takes on the prior films as well. It almost felt like it was bordering on that, and this one on the other hand was not that. This one was definitely, this was to me, this was a filmmaker coming back, making a really good entry, and in my mind, one that, even though it was a lot longer, to me, I actually had better storytelling than the other two films, partially because of that length.
Each character actually got a proper arc. Even Superman got a bit of an arc in this film.
Yeah.
I mean, not
most of it dead, but when he came back,
Batman's progression to being more hopeful in this film worked so much better. It didn't feel like a total 180. It felt more like it's something that progressed as it went. I think Cyborg was probably the best character in this film, this version of the film. But Flash probably got the best moment, maybe in the whole DCU so far.
Like, even if we take this series out of it, one of the most epic and powerful moments in any DC movie, I would say, is that at the speed of force. But
yeah, that was just brilliant, because you know the tension was high, because he'd taken that shot to her leg, he was limping, he was basically fucked. He was pretty much just going, okay, I'm not meant to do this, but I have to. I don't really have another choice. And you've seen most of Justice League die at this point, so like it becomes this massive now or never sort of thing. And he'd been doubting himself the whole film, and you didn't have that pep talk with Batman that was in the original version either.
Yeah.
And while I do miss that scene, because I liked that scene, I would admit that I liked that scene. What I think it gives this moment is Flash much more self-determines himself in that moment. He's like, no, I got this. I deserve to be here. I'm the fucking hero. Let's go.
Music-wise, imagery-wise, it's just a powerful, great, perfect sequence as well.
My brain just turned straight off watching that. And I mean that in the best way. I didn't analyze that moment at all. I just sat back and went, let's go.
It still has a lot of moments like that. That's definitely the big moment. I still felt that there were a lot of powerful moments in the film.
Yeah.
I still felt that Snyder directed it really well. I still felt that, well, the thing that's kind of funny about this movie is that I do think that it kind of proves that you can make a crossover movie but still give it a personal touch, not just in Snyder's visual style, but also I think in the fact that it does feel quite grounded. And this is perhaps unintentional, but it feels grounded in not only the series and ironically even how the theatrical cut was received, but also within Snyder's own personal life and his own situation. This is very much him returning. He had his Batman v Superman ending. He had his moment. And this is him coming back and showing, no, I can direct a movie. Flex events that hadn't even happened yet at the time of writing, because stuff like Lois Lane dealing with the grief of Superman's death, or even other characters dealing with the grief of losing a parent or losing somebody, that feels ironically grounded in Snyder's own personal tragedy. That sort of unintentional parallel, I think, gives the film a bit of power. And he also shows as well in this one, I'm not just a guy who makes dark superhero movies. I'm a guy who can make superhero movies. He's made a lot of comic book movies, but this one absolutely shows that he could pull off, the hope aspect.
Yeah, he can.
Like, overcoming tragedy, overcoming bad things, being a good person. And it just sort of annoys me that for years people just labeled him as like, just an edgelord who just likes to make like dark movies or whatever, or just likes to be edgy and stuff. And it's like he shows in this one especially, I can make a hopeful film.
Do you know what? I think this film proves that Zack Snyder was playing the long game.
Absolutely.
And do you know what? It actually makes me rewatch previous films in a bit more of a forgiving light. I never disliked Batman v Superman. I've made that pretty clear. I've never disliked the film. For me, when the Ultimate Edition came out, it got better, but it still wasn't amazing. With the retrospect of it as being a setup, don't go wrong, I'm not going to claim it's the art of cinema. I'm not going to claim it's brilliant. It's actually good. In context, it's good.
We did the live watches after you had seen it, but before I had seen it.
Yeah.
So I assume that you might have reacted differently had you not seen it. I assume.
As much as I do like the film, I had a lot more time to think about it, and I think I came across a lot more eloquently than I maybe would have done. I really like this film. It was a surprise to me. I wasn't expecting it to be good. I wasn't expecting it to be that good.
The other thing I think is reflective in both of these films as well is that redemption narrative as well. It's in a few of these DC films. I like meta narratives in movies, so I kind of like how both of them have this redemption narrative for both the films that come before it and also the creators as well. Obviously, like Zack, it was how his movies have been received and how they've been perceived, but for James Gunn as well, he wrote this film whilst he was still currently fired by Disney. He made the film when he knew that he was going to get rehired, but he wrote it after he'd been fired by Disney. And although you can slightly see the whole thing of like, okay, I'm allowed to be a bit more unhinged, he could have very easily made it just like a total F you, fuck you, I'm going to just write whatever the hell I want, But instead, he gives that film a genuine sense of soulful heart that I think that he might not have done had another person been in his situation. He can throw in a lot of crazy shit, a lot of like edgy shit, but at the end of the day, there is like totally heart and passion, like to him as a person and him as a writer as well. And that I think was important, just because he so easily could have fallen down, but he actually kind of used it to go back up a little bit, and that was excellent. Well, let's move on to Marvel as well.
Yeah.
Because wow, the MCU had a lot of movies this year, so we're gonna kind of narrow the focus. Fairly happy with the MCU output in 2021.
Yeah.
I thought the Black Widow was better than a lot of people said. I didn't think Shang-Chi was as good as certain people said. Eternals was quite disappointing. I did expect way more out of that than what it actually gave me.
I'll agree on Eternals for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'd say it's worthy of being like the MCU's first rotten film on Rotten Tomatoes. I think it's more that the ambition doesn't quite match the ultimate quality, which is something that I think the Spider-Man No Way Home, even though you could say that maybe Eternals is more well-made, or you can even say that it's a bit more ambitious, I think that No Way Home was very much the MCU film that was needed. Not only after that film, but honestly, I'd say for Spider-Man in general, that this movie, what it felt like to me was it felt like not only looking back at the two like Holland Spider-Man films, but also looking back at all the Spider-Man films, truly combining them together and not using that as an excuse to really wallow in fan service and nostalgia, but to tell a story. And I think that's probably its biggest accomplishment. Oh yeah, I think I was impressed by it most just on a script level.
I've got some niggles, but I think on the most part it worked well. Had some great moments. It was undeniably a good film. I just liked it slightly less than a lot of people did. I mean, I still really liked it.
Well, to me, it got better as it went. I don't think it started out on the best note, but it got better as it went along. And I think it really got great when, spoiler, when Aunt May died. And then when the two Spider-Men came in, on a fanboy level, it's like, I grew up with the Raimi Spider-Man films. I even grew up with like the Garfield ones as well. I mean, I was still a kid when those movies came out. So it was kind of amazing to see them not only reprise their roles, but be used to service this story. And I felt that it actually was quite a loving continuation of those films.
I think it is a love letter to the cinematic Spider-Man. Both returns him to basics and pushes him forward. That's part of the film's greatest achievement as well.
It made me look back on like the other films a bit like differently as well. Like it made me think about what came before. it's quite good redemption for the Amazing Spider-Man film series.
Yeah,
It even made me want to rewatch Amazing Spider-Man 2 because I was surprised by how much they incorporated it into this film. At the moment where he catches MJ, Electro, or how Spider-Man is in this film. I think it was surprisingly a good sequel to Amazing Spider-Man 2. Put it as like the best Spider-Man movie that's ever been made, but I would say it's probably script-wise probably the best since, if we're talking like live-action Spider-Man films, probably
best Spider-Man
the
2.
most, I'd say so. And there is a part of me that does maybe want to give Spider-Man 3 the spot over this, but that would be a bit more out of bias because I do think this film had a better script than Spider-Man 3 did. I like Spider-Man 3.
I don't dislike Spider-Man 3 at all, but
No.
I think objectively this film is better.
The thing is that this film didn't really cut corners to tell its big story, whereas
No.
that film did. But this film really doesn't. It just tells its story very naturally and it works. Like held it back from being absolutely amazing.
I think the whole Peter Parker Spider-Man thing actually got resolved way too quickly in terms of consequences for him. If they thought he murdered Mysterio, there is absolutely zero fucking way that he could get off in about 3 seconds from that. It just wouldn't happen. Out here dissing Matt Murdock's lawyer abilities because he's a pretty good lawyer, and even Daredevil ain't that fucking good. I think there wasn't really that much of a consequence for his identity being out there. I mean, Spider-Man's identity has been revealed a couple of times, and it made his life hell. And I think ultimately that would happen. And I don't like that they kind of just avoided that. Like, they think he's a murderer. Someone will have him killed. Although I loved how Aunt May's death was done. Realistically, someone would have targeted her as well. And they were like, "Oh, he moved to a safe house." But that was way too fucking easy. Like, I don't even believe he would have gotten home before someone decided to go take a swing. Admittedly, it would have been a bit dark for the MCU to do that. It just felt more natural to the story. Not all the villains were done that well. There were too many of them anyway. I mean, don't worry, it was great to see the Sinister Six, but I mean, the Lizard was basically, I'm pretty sure that was just reused footage.
At the end of it was, yeah.
Yeah, Lizard didn't feel like a character. I didn't know why he was there, to be honest. He shouldn't have been. Electro, I liked. I thought the Sandman, again, massively underutilized. Again, reused the footage at the end there, and it was obvious. And I don't know, my opinion, if you can't do anything with them, don't include them. At the start, some of the comedy was just getting in the way. Not that I didn't want comedy in the film. I mean, it's a Spider-Man film. I obviously want quips. I obviously want comedy, but it almost undercut some of the tensions. I didn't like Doctor Strange being in this film, really.
I've always served his purpose pretty well.
He did, but I didn't like the fact that he had a purpose in the film. That's something that I thought was stupid. I didn't like the fact that he was like, can I just, have everyone forget that I was ever Spider-Man? Because
how else could you really have done this whole other characters from other universes coming in?
I get why it happened. I get why it worked. But it didn't feel like a decision Spider-Man would actually make. Even this one, who's a lot less responsible than the others. I really didn't. It did not feel like an actual decision to me. I think those were my issues. But it was probably Tom Holland's best performance as Spider-Man. The film had real emotional stakes. I think the first time, I felt like Spider-Man was in danger. Things were genuinely going to go fucking wrong. I thought God was an absolute tour de force. That was stellar.
They had him acting very similarly to how he acted in Spider-Man. They upped the viciousness and they upped the villainy, and they made him. I think it worked as well because just Willem Dafoe was able to. I think he gave an even better performance than he did in the original Spider-Man because the material itself was just so harsh. And he was fantastic. I agree. On the humor point, I do sort of agree about a couple of bits later on in the film, and I think that did contribute to the film feeling a bit long because there was some baggy scenes of characters exchanging funny banter that I felt kind of slowed the film down. But I do think when it was being sincere, when it got to the point, even the humor worked the best when it was just the Spider-Man, because the humor with them was just so inspired and it just made so much sense, all of the stuff.
Also, one other thing I felt like Andrew Garfield proved that he definitely deserved to play Spider-Man. I think there was a bit of a backlash to Garfield as Spider-Man because Amazing Spider-Man 2 was shit.
Yeah.
Moments, but it's shit. Andrew Garfield is not the reason for that. I like that he was almost a lot more down on himself Peter, this depressed, quite broken Peter Parker.
You could call that another meta-narrative as well. It almost stops being meta and just outright becomes text when Toby Spider-Man just outright says no, you're not lame, you're amazing. That felt like an acknowledgement, totally.
Yeah, that was definitely text. Don't go on. I was there a bit at the line oh. It was sweet, but it did take me out of the film. I both liked it and I didn't like it.
Okay, yeah.
It reminded me that what I was watching was text, and I was like, but It was a sweet moment.
Yeah, I think it was sweet because it was meta.
I think that was part of it as well. Two minds about it, just because it was so, to me, like, it's very much the audience talking to him. But I think the three Spider-Man bouncing off each other was great. The fact they bonded over loss and responsibility, and then started becoming fun as they got into it, was absolutely how Spider-Man is. Just I completely bought that's how Spider-Mans would interact. And not one of them phoned it in either. That would have been really easy, but like they didn't.
Toby seemed a bit like older, but that just felt more natural for the character as well. It felt more like he was the grown-up one, he was the aged one, and then he's still a bit more humorous than he was in the other films, so that helped mitigate it a little bit. But still, you know,
But he still got those moments, like the same thing as in the first Spider-Man. Grab that glider at full throttle.
Yeah. If I had a favorite moment in the film, that would be up there. Absolutely, I loved it, and I loved how that even called back to like Spider-Man 3. You know, I loved how he didn't even need to say anything; he just did it, looked at Peter, and you just got the entire point.
I tell you what, the action in this was surprisingly brutal for a Spider-Man. But like, I've not sat there and been like, oh, in a Spider-Man film since the first one, and I mean the first Sam Raimi one. My favorite Spider-Man film is actually the first one. I'm really honest about that. This is the first time I'd sat there and gone, Jesus! And it was Peter that made me do that. The Green Goblin did as well, but Peter made me do that.
Talk about the final fight.
The one that's through like 6 floors of the hallway here. The final fight, yeah. But I'm talking about the first one between him and Goblin. That was one of my favourite fight sequences of this year as well, just because it was so fantastical, but so rough. But that was my favourite part of the film, because you saw Spider-Man on his own, trying to solve his problems in the most kind and empathetic way, like Spider-Man would, and get bitten back so hard. And then, you know, losing Aunt May as well. Oh my God. And the way that she didn't realise it first, he didn't realise it first, and it just started ebbing. Oh my God.
First really good use of the Aunt May character in this series. Again, it does make me want to like look back at the prior 2 films. I really was doing that when I was watching this one. It does make me want to look back on those moments and think to myself, those moments, as simple as they might seem, have more impact because we now know what it's like for him to lose her.
She was Peter's moral center. He had to become his own moral center in this film. He, you know, this is the film where he had to take responsibility and become a man, and he did. I think that was a great arc for Peter to have, and there was a real tragedy to it. And even though he did the right thing, it cost him so much, and that is the core of Spider-Man. I've not felt that since Spider-Man 3. I think it was missing from the Garfield films, and it has been from the Tom Holland films, and to have that feeling back as you get Spider-Man swinging through the city, and it both triumphant and sad, and
it was a good way to close out this trilogy, but also leave it open for a continuation.